Good afternoon, and thank you to our hosts for inviting the Global Smart Grid Federation to take part in this important day or 2 days of debates around smart grid policy in India. I'm actually a salesman for GE, and it's very hard not to lock the doors and not let you out until I get an order, particularly when I hear all these problems, because they're all solvable. But I'll try and park that bit of it and be agnostic in what I say. If I could just go off script for a moment, and I am conscious of time, Mr. Chairman, but coming on the back of the presentation we've just heard, and looking briefly through the book, the paper that's just been released in the India Smart Grid Day, the institutional framework for smart grids in India, Mr. Kumar, there's a very good explanation of the challenge that you face. And what I hope to do, now that I've read this and being here at a timely moment, is help Reggie and his colleagues in the debate about the impact that the ISGF can have as a cross-sectoral body spanning public and private sectors in a very, very important debate for the future of the citizens of this country and for the economy in this country. And it actually points exactly to why we were delighted to get the invitation in the Global Smart Grid Federation to participate today, because this presentation, there's a lot of detailed slides which are there for studying afterwards. I want to just paint some broad themes, but it's mainly about sharing knowledge, and sharing knowledge not only to accelerate the deployment of smart grids, which is our tagline there, but also to save cost and get you to an endpoint more quickly. So I'll talk to a certain extent about roadmaps, but you'll leave them with you to study afterwards. I'm going to tell you a little bit in a few moments about the Global Smart Grid Federation and why it's relevant, and particularly, I hope, its burgeoning relationship with ISCAN. I was very pleased to hear Russ Conklin's presentation and look forward to working with him over the next day or so to deepen our joint participation and give you a more or less European perspective on some aspects. So Reggie, in his introduction to me as a speaker earlier on, referred to the fact the Global Smart Grid Federation links these national smart grid federations, and that's key, because they're dealing with it at the coal face, so to speak, in the country. But by sharing best practice, and I'll give you some examples of how the Global Smart Grid Federation is doing that, we'll all get to an end point more quickly and create economic growth. Given that I am very definitely working for GE from the private sector, economic growth is important to us all. This is a mirror image, more or less, I guess, of the map that Russ presented. But that's the federation that the Indian Smart Grid Federation is now part of at a global level. And if you just look at some of that in the middle of the map there, it's obviously not a national organisation, but we are delighted to have EDSO, the European Distribution System Operators organisation, as key members of our federation. They represent 31 DSOs in Europe, who cover 70% of Europe's population, and we're getting direct input from that community. If we look at what the Global Smart Grid Federation outputs are, we've already produced a report which highlights some key issues, and one of the themes that I want to talk about is the speed of technology versus regulation, and that's why I was keen to make those remarks at the start about the institutional framework for smart grid development, because the regulators exist with a solemn duty, and a quite right solemn duty, to protect the interests of the consumers, but that is not always wholly in the national interest, and that's an important debate to have as you frame regulation, interoperability standards, gaining consumer interest and support, and that's important. If you look at the experience in America, and I hope Russ doesn't mind me poking fun at some of their experiences with the RARA money, where they installed smart meters at a significant rate, possibly in some cases ahead of the consumers' willingness to accept it. And there are instances quoted where the smart meter installer turned up to be greeted by somebody with a gun telling them to go away. So they clearly haven't won public opinion there. I hope I'm not being insensitive in saying that, but the other piece is protecting intellectual property rights, and that is really important. Again, in a more expanded workshop, it would be a really interesting point to debate how IPR is protected, because IPR is derived from innovation, and if it's shared or not protected, it'll stifle innovation, and therefore the acceleration of smart grid won't be as quick. Some of the report findings are self-explanatory, and there'll be a reference for that. Because we are essentially an organisation of industrial representatives, the business case figures largely in a lot of our debate. And it's not making the case for proprietary technologies, it's talking about the particular need to have a rounded business case which reflects things which are more than just the investment decision for that particular project. And somebody has to pay, and therefore it gets to that crux or crossroads between the regulator's role protecting the consumer and the need for the investment, and the ratepayer ultimately takes that role on. Okay, this in the next quarter, this report, which is a dynamic document, will be updated, and as you can see, we will add in the latest information from the India Smart Grid Forum, and having seen just at a brief glance the quality of the report that you've just been presented, there will be interesting additions to the report from India. But you can see there are 5 countries listed there, and we have another 2 countries in the pipeline to join in the next month. So we hope to grow to about 18 countries in the next 3 months. I really smiled when the slide was put up by my colleague on the speaking platform, because we violently agree that the smarter grid is definitely evolution, not revolution. In fact, in GE, if it can be proprietary for a moment, we're trying to abolish the term smart grid because it's been overused and overhyped and overinterpreted. I absolutely agree that if you put 100 experts in the room, you'll come up with a minimum 110 interpretations, and that's taking us off the point. We actually refer to it as grid modernization, because you have to realize, and the next slide will demonstrate this, grids in each country already exist. They're at various stages of maturity, and the technologies and innovations are being applied to an existing grid. There maybe was a feeling created by the hype in the initial days that somehow there was this big breakthrough technology driven by the internet that was going to be applied to the system and make things happen. The reality is that, and again there's common cause with some of the points that Russ Conklin made, we see the grid as covering the 3 layers: applications, the control flows and the heavy metal that generates and transmits power. And in that slide there, the colours, the slightly darker grey is, when it says the old grid, that's the existing grid, and it's morphing into new areas. And if you look again at the role of the regulator in not just the economic modelling of dispatchable load and market conditions, in Europe certainly there's a huge drive towards efficiency and energy efficiency. That's not just using less, but optimising the asset utilisation and being efficient in a business sense. And that will drive the smarter grid applying to the particular needs of the country. But what we have to look at is certainly, in again referring to some of our experience at the industry level, there's an industrial internet coming there that's going to manage this tsunami of data that's heading our way and help us to intelligently analyse it and make the smart grid work for the benefit of people. I said grids are at the various stages of maturity. In order to make sure I don't get lynched country by country, I've taken where we think each country sits on this spectrum of maturity, from starting off point to the current highest possible attainment level. But that reflects where you have to move from and to, and none of this is proprietary. You have main functionalities needed depending on where your current needs are, and they're addressed all the way through from SAIDI, SAIFI and OPEX reductions driven by this efficiency and cost efficiency that regulators are using. But if you look at some of the value propositions that are at the top of the CEO's list in utilities in Europe, technical and commercial virtual power plant, right, which allows you to apply some of these breakthrough technologies, is a key area for innovation, because at one level, if you ask the chief technical officer of a utility in Europe what keeps him awake at night, he will tell you, it's what's happening in my low voltage network, Paddy. I have no visibility of what's going on. And the technical and commercial VPP becomes important, because once distributed generation, and I was really interested in how low the kilowatt values were in some of the DG projects that are being applied, that will all happen in the LV network and will cause major problems. And we're getting, although Europe has this 20-20-20 mandate, the debate is not as centric around the point of creating low carbon economies as improving power quality, and as I said there, increasing energy efficiency, and critically improving asset and yield optimization. That's why we talked about it being an evolution, not a revolution. You can get some immediate paybacks, which you can then use for other investments by focusing on that area of your grid. And I'm linking this into what the GSGF are doing. And we have, within our board group and within our total membership, we run on the basis of a monthly membership call. We've identified the need to study 3 key areas, and they are being managed by 3 working groups. And if you look at the question of interoperability, the question of standards is already well covered by organisations like NIST in the States, CEN and CENELEC, and from my colleague Mr Park on the stage here, you're going to hear more about standards, or that's his speciality in Europe. That working group is led by Per Olof Granstrom, who is the Secretary General of EDSO and the Vice Chairman of Global Smart Grid Federation. And that is national associations talking directly to each other a couple of times a month now at pace, and that will produce important information back to this sharing learning. Interfaces of grid users, and I'm delighted to share the stage today with Kunoyoshi-san. His colleague Murashima-san is leading this group, and the Japanese Smart Community Alliance are part of a world-leading economy in electric vehicle research. Isn't it great that we can get plugged into that? That's a kind of a joke, but into that knowledge base very quickly, and to the benefit of all of the communities or interest communities around the world. And lastly, Connection FDG, I've already referred to it. That's being led by Rob Wilhite of the Gridwise Alliance, and it's all building towards a first report back in March this year, having only started in October, and we'll continue to do and disseminate information drops at a meaningful level. The collaborative partners we work with, you've already heard Russ talk about a number of those, and we're very, very proud of our association with ISCAN, and see ourselves as a mirror image of what they do with their membership on the public policy side, and bring an industrial perspective to it. And those are the other organisations we work with it. This is how we're disseminating information, and we hope to have a very successful joint high-level conference with EDSO in Brussels in May. Again, I'm conscious of the amount of time we've been allocated for speaking, so you've seen this type of slide many times, so it's there to study afterwards. What I want to do is just talk to some roadmap examples for a couple of moments, and where the points have been covered by previous speakers, I'll gloss over them. And the aim here is, again, a stress to let you afterwards look at the slides in a considered way and study, what the common themes are. And if you will see some key issues or common themes emerging. And R&D is important. Although I talked about evolution, not revolution, nevertheless it's moving on, and the creation of innovative platforms will allow those key technology challenges to be met. So this is how Australia sees it, with cross-sectoral integration being important to them, but governance and policy frameworks, and that goes through everything. That's why I picked up on this institutional frameworks for advancing smart grid debate. Otherwise, if you don't have that, it'll just be individual utilities making technology decisions in isolation. In order to move the smart grid investment in infrastructure on at the scale that will make a difference, particularly at the scale of challenge you face in industry, in India, it does need a framework, and that governance and policy framework is important because industry is a key stakeholder in that. We can only make investments where there's a degree of certainty, and therefore the regulatory and policy framework is a key part of that. These slides get more and more busy, and they really need longer than I would be able to give them today. But you can see the priorities again there with the three X's: policy and regulatory, control systems. Smart metering is listed there as a key priority in Australia. Due deference to Russ on the stage, this is the US model, and everybody acknowledges you've got to take a long-term view, but look at the overall framework, or the roadmap if you want to call it that. Develop your critical technologies and go through phases of design and testing, leading to market acceptance, and then to widespread deployment and industrialization. Okay, it's too detailed to do that, but the characteristics are there that Ross actually presented in a great way in his slides. If we look at Europe, and Europe has its own challenges because there are 27 countries, I think, about to become 29 in the EU, and that's only in the EU area. There's a big an area again outside of that, and coordinating those national plans into a European-wide program is very, very difficult, because you obviously get driven towards maybe being seen to dumb down to get the lowest common denominator, which is not necessarily conducive to widespread rollout. But all the themes are there that have been discussed by previous speakers. But the set plan, which is led or contributed in no small measure to by the Executive Director of the Global Smart Grid Federation, whose main job he's called Professor Ronnie Belmans. He chairs the set plan group, and it brings together research and industry in wide programs. I put this slide in because what I do like to do is emphasize the fact that creating business from the smart grid and developing industrial opportunities for the SMEs in your country is important to economic growth. And that is one of the debates that the Indian Smart Grid Federation and national federations are making with the governments. Smart Grid Ireland has done that very successfully in Ireland, and has created projects which are worth several millions of pounds, and the individual members have contributed to those under standard business conditions. The innovation energy projects in Europe, one of the approaches they've done is to create virtual clusters. So these are no longer, although they're based in a region, they bring together organisations from several European countries to create specialisms, and that is an important part of, I think, growth, rather than have one country or one university try to claim all the intellectual high ground. It doesn't happen like that. Smart grids platforms and the role of the prosumer, which is why I talked about distributed generation, because that'll be lower scale production, is going to become more and more important, and that's being discussed. These slides, there's a lot of detail on them. The references are on the slides for you to come and study afterwards, or I'll be here for 2 days to ask any questions that you have. But again, what you're getting is understanding it has to be a strategic research agenda. I'll just go through these, Mr. Chairman, because I'm looking at the time here.